name's Russ Squire, and I'm going to take you through a course called Using 1031 Exchanges as a Tool to Increase Your Real Estate Business. I run a company by the name of 1031 Property Exchange, and so that's our offices. We are located on 1087 Stone Ridge Drive, Suite 2A, next to CNH Engineering. Phone, website, and email address are all listed here on the presentation. And this is a little bit of my biography and background. I graduated in '82 with degrees in finance and economics from Montana State. Have quite a bit of work experience in real estate development and securities. I had a 1031 exchange company that I ran back in the early 2000s and sold. I was '97 president of Southwest Montana Home Builders. I helped found the Parade of Homes here in Bozeman. I was the president of Eagle Mount organization for disabled and cancer kids. I sat on the Bozeman Impact Fee Advisory Board, affordable housing, won the Red Cross Community Service Award, so on and so forth. So anyway, that's a little bit about me. Let's get right into it. What is a 1031 exchange? Well, a 1031 exchange, really quite simply, is just a provision in the Internal Revenue Code. And what it does is it allows the owners of property that are held for investment or business purposes to roll over all of their equity in their existing property into another property without paying any capital gains tax, depreciation recapture, or any state capital gains tax. So this can be a significant amount of tax, sometimes amounting to as much as 30 to 50% of the value of property that's actually sold. Okay, so let's think of it like an IRA rollover. I mean, it's portable. It's like a suitcase where the gain can be ported between properties. Who exchanges property? Well, believe it or not, over 65% of all 1031 exchanges are for 1 to 4 unit rental properties. The other 35% are commercial and ranch. You know, a lot of people think it's only shopping malls, it's only office buildings, it's only, large ranches. No, that's not the case. Actually, 65% are 1 to 4 unit rental properties. So it's a huge opportunity for residential realtors. Commercial and ranch real estate do represent over 50% of the value of all 1031 transactions, but that's because of the relative size of those transactions. But it's a tidal wave of cash, and it's something that realtors can really take advantage of to leverage their business. When you use a 1031 exchange, think of 2 closings, 2 real estate transactions, and of course 2 commissions. And part of my background that I didn't mention, I was a licensed Montana realtor as well as a broker. So I've had experience in the industry, and I do understand how this all works. What does a 1031 exchange look like? Well, this is a diagram we did up. You can see at the top the exchanger, and to the left they're going to pass a deed to a buyer. The cash is going to flow to 1031 Property Exchange, but not directly. It actually goes to an escrow bank. And then the cash flows out to a seller who in turn passes a deed directly to the exchanger. So there's direct deeding that's done in a 1031 exchange. It's not like they have to deed the property to us. They deed it directly to the exchanger. The period, 45 days, is the identification period after the date of the closing of the first property sold, or the relinquished property. Then you have 180 days to complete the exchange, and we'll go through some of these identification rules a little later on in the presentation. So how does the money flow in an exchange and the instructions? Well, basically, we sit there at the bottom, and on the left-hand side, you'll see there's a closing at a title company for the relinquished property, or the property that your client is selling. The cash then immediately flows in a wire directly from the title company to the escrow bank. Now, there can be cash going to the exchanger, but that's going to be considered taxable. That'll create a taxable event, and it's called cash boot, and we'll talk about that more later as well. We basically sit there and fill out forms that are required to keep the exchange compliant with the IRS regulations, as well as give instructions to the escrow bank, and then also instructions to the closing company, title company involved with the replacement property. So that's sort of the money and cash flow diagram of an exchange. So what is a 1034 exemption? Not to be confused with the 1031. A 1034 is for a primary residence, but it can be used in conjunction with a 1031, and we're going to talk some more about that. It allows up to $250,000 in gain to be taken out tax-free for a single taxpayer, and up to $500,000 in gain for a married couple filing a joint return. Now, the biggest mistake most people make regarding a 1034 is confusing that 250 or 500,000 in gain with the gross selling price. And you can sell a $2 million home as a married couple, and as long as your cost basis is not below 1.5 million, all of the gain is exempt from tax. To the 1034 exemption, you have a 2-year holding requirement. You can sell a home every 2 years. Now, this is a popular trick amongst home builders, especially spec builders. They'll build a home, live in it for 2 years, sell it, move out, build another home. I know a lot of guys that after 4 homes, maybe 5 homes tops, had completely paid for their own home by using this strategy back in the 90s and 2000s. Now, what if the gain is greater than the 1034 exemption? Then what can you do? Well, here's a tax tip. Consider converting part of the primary residence into a rental property. You could do that and then use the 1034 exemption combined with a 1031 exchange to eliminate all tax. It's not something I see a lot, but it's something that is very definitely a viable alternative. 5 basic rules for 1031 exchanges. First, both the relinquished property and the acquired property must be held for the productive use in business, trade, or for investment purposes. The proceeds have to be exchanged through a qualified intermediary. That's part of the IRC regulations. A qualified escrow account must be used to hold the relinquished property proceeds until the exchange is completed, and that is only if the exchange is not a simultaneous exchange. All cash proceeds from the relinquished property must be reinvested in the replacement property, or you create what is called taxable boot. And the replacement property also has to be subject to an equal or greater level of debt than the replacement property. So if you've got $100,000 in debt on the property you sold, you're going to have to replace that debt on the property that you purchase. You must have an equal or greater amount of debt in order to completely defer all taxes on the exchange. Superstars use 1031 exchange to increase their business? Well, by turning client problems into solutions using 1031 as a tool. And here's a few examples I'll give you. One, a client has raw land that produces no income and no write-offs because you can't depreciate raw land. Your solution using a 1031 exchange, sell the raw land and use it to purchase a multifamily rental housing project producing positive cash flow and depreciation allowances. Commission, $12,900 on the sale of the raw land and $6,700 as a buyer's broker on the purchase of replacement property. Total commission, $19,600. And these are all real examples of exchanges that we've seen occur in the past. So, 1031 exchange, just remember, you got a chance at 2, even 3 commissions. So it's double and triple commission strategy. Your client has a primary residence in a fourplex but wants to move to a warmer climate. So your solution using a 1031, client sells the primary residence using the 1034 exemption or exclusion, then sells the fourplex using a 1031 exchange and buys a bed and breakfast in Arizona using both 1031 and 1034 exemptions. Commission, $12,400 on the sale of the primary residence and $16,200 on the sale of the fourplex, and a $4,500 referral on the purchase of a replacement B&B. That's a total commission of $33,100. That is triple commission strategy, and that happens a lot with 1031 exchanges. Some more superstar examples. Client owns a primary residence in a duplex worth $215,000 with $135,000 in debt and wants to build a move-up home. So they own this single family home that's worth $460,000 that they currently live in, have no debt on it. They have a signed buy-sell for $145,000 on a piece of raw land. And you want to make sure if their buy-sell signed that it's got the exchange language in it. However, in this particular case, the solution you use, the client sells the duplex using a 1031, then purchases the raw land. They use a build-to-suit exchange. They put in a well, a septic, a road on the lot with the remaining equity dollars from the duplex, and that all has to be completed within a 180-day time frame. Now, at this point, there's no evidence to the contrary that the new property is anything other than an investment or a potential rental. In year 2, after a 2-year holding period, they can convert the raw land to personal use and acquire a construction loan to complete or continue the completion of their replacement property. At the end of 2 years, they sell their primary residence using the 1034 exemption, and then they pay off the construction loan and convert the new land and building to a primary residence. And this is all completely legal under the guise of IRC 1031. So commission $12,900 on the sale of the duplex as a listing agent, $3,987 as the buyer's broker on the raw land, and $15,900 on the sale of the primary residence as the listing broker. Total commission $32,787. Once again, triple commission strategy. And by solving other people's problems, you become a real estate superstar, and you can see days like this. Okay, so solving grandma and grandpa's desire to be near their children or grandchildren. I've seen a lot of this now as the baby boomers age. So the trend back towards semi-nuclear families has been on the rise a bit. You meet a young couple with 2 preschool children who have a strong desire to own their own home. So being the consultative, and I say the word consultative because it's important, you ask the question, where do your parents live and do they own any investment property? Bingo, that's $1 million question. They disclose they were raised in San Diego and mom and dad have owned a fourplex for almost 20 years. So you make a quick phone call. You talk to grandma and grandpa and discover they're tired of property management. So you show them how they could convert that equity into a second home, and they could rent that home to their children. In fact, it's legal. They can rent it for up to 20% below market rent. They can visit their children as often as they like. They can even gift their children up to $30,000 a year to help them make the payments. Now that's, the spouse, the child, and then the child's spouse. After 2 years, they could convert the home to a personal residence tax-free. So what problems did you solve? The grandparents now get to live near their children and grandchildren. We're seeing a lot of that. My wife and I saw that a few years back with her parents moving this direction. You're also able to help the young family save up enough down payment for a home of their own thanks to the gifting strategy, and they get to live in a home that their parents purchased. So you become the trusted advisor in this case. And the commission, $13,200 as a dual agent on the sale of a single family home. Now I know some of you may not work as dual agents anymore, but this was back in the early 2000s. And then 2 years later, $7,500 as a buyer's agent on the purchase of a single family home. So 2 commissions, total commission $20,700. More superstar examples. Buying a dream home in a nice resort area tax-free. Well, gee, how many people come to Montana and want to buy a dream home? So your client wants to own a vacation home in a nice resort. Let's say it's Big Sky. They inform you that someday they might even want it to be a primary home. And they further have rental property that they're willing to sell to buy it. So your solution using 1031, your client has 2 options they could use here. One, they could buy the home using a 1031 exchange, place it in a vacation rental pool, use it for up to 2 weeks per year of personal use, and pick up a couple more weeks for marketing and maintenance visits. Or 2, they could rent it to a family member for 20% below market rents, gift that family member the money to pay the rent, and then use it as often as they'd like to. In other words, they can use it months out of the year. After 2 years as a rental, they could convert the property to personal use and still meet the 1031 exchange time holding requirement. So, one of those 2 strategies should appeal to your client and should satisfy their needs based on their use requirements. Commission on this, $29,000 as the dual agent on the sale of a $550,000 home. Superstar examples, one more. The ranch broker conservation buyer strategy. As a ranch broker, you're going to encounter many different types of buyers, but as ranch land has appreciated to the point that traditional uses become uneconomical, especially here in mountain towns, there's been increased activity in locating conservation buyers. And these buyers typically use strategies involving the use of 1031 exchanges put together with conservation easements. Now the easements can take some time to put together, so they don't have to be in place right away. They're still going to benefit from those credits. But the value of the easement credits when combined with 1031 often allow the buyer to purchase the land for a fraction of its listing price. So attorneys, accountants, and appraisers familiar with development and the initiation of conservation easements need to be brought into the process early on, as a conservation easement can have a timeline that lasts for several months before they're completed. It doesn't have to slow the sales transaction, assuming the buyer has the cash to close the deal. you know, as just a 1031, but the value of the conservation easement can be realized whether it's in place at the settlement or after the fact. How to position yourself as a 1031 exchange expert. Real quick, get your business cards printed with the word 1031 exchange specialist. Now, I know a realtor who that one little twist opened a conversation that made them tens of thousands of dollars. And it opens that conversation about a 1031 and how it can benefit the client and what other properties they own. Always, always take a client's property inventory. Nothing more important you can do. Listen and hear all the real estate they own. Now, this is a true story. A residential realtor was selling a $240,000 single family home to a 58-year-old woman. She saw a 1031 exchange specialist on the realtor's business card and told her she was interested in selling a 48-unit apartment building. She got that listing and it was a $50,000 plus commission. Host seminars on how to sell your property with no taxes. That usually, if it doesn't fill a room, it's going to bring you some people, some highly targeted people. Network with trade associations and property investors. Get to know property managers in your area. We're going to talk about all of these things. Network with attorneys and accountants. And use our website at www.1031property.exchange as a tool to educate and inform your clients, because all the tools are there. Great tool. What you can do, get Microsoft PowerPoint software, put together a PowerPoint. Real easy to do. Build a seminar in PowerPoint. That's not very hard. Buy or borrow a projector. You know, we've got a projector we can loan you if you can't find one. Invite experts as guest speakers, CPAs and attorneys, especially you know, real estate attorneys. Secure a location like a school. I find schools work the best, but you can use a library, a hotel, a conference room. It doesn't really matter. Send out an invite to all past clients and prospects. You know, let them know, hey, I'm going to show you how to do something here. I'm going to teach you some tools that could be valuable. Put an ad in the paper, and all the ad has to say, the title is Learn How to Sell Your Property with No Taxes. Hold the seminar. You know, we'd be happy to join you if it fits into our schedule, and you can even use our projector. And then, because nobody else does this kind of thing, you get more business. Start networking with trade associations and property investors. You know, the home builders, especially the spec builders or developer builders, they need real estate agents. You know, many builders build a home they live in for 2 years, like I said earlier, and then establish primary residence, then sell the home and build another using a 1034 exclusion to avoid dealer status. You know, real estate investor groups, trade associations, you know, they're in just about every community. Watch the newspaper, Craigslist, etc. MLS is certainly not the only place to find listings and sales anymore. Okay, so property managers, your new best friend. So guess who often knows when investors are selling investment properties first? Yep, the property manager. So get to know them. Almost every property manager has 1031 exchange potential, you know, 2 or more commissions. Take them out to lunch, build a relationship, and watch the referrals pay off in spades. You know, network with accountants and real estate attorneys. No question, no advisors have more control over their clients than accountants and attorneys. They generally are the first to know when a client will be selling an investment, rental, or business property. They're great resources of referral business. And you can build relationships with these and maintain them. And if you do, while business is good, business will never get bad. And we all remember what 2006 to 2012 felt like. Also, network with CCIMs, Certified Commercial Investment Managers. Replacement property with good capitalization rates is an important aspect of 1031 exchanges. I mean, people look at that net operating income divided by what you're charging or what the price of the property is, and that's the bottom line. That's the cap rate. That's the big nut. Nobody wants to bank anything anymore based on pro formas or anybody's wild guess of what something might do. They want to see tax returns. You may not be a commercial property expert, but networking with CCIMs can help you, as a client, get what they want, and then you pick up a buyer's broker referral. Don't try to be all things to all people, especially if your primary specialty is residential real estate or ranch real estate. That's what the specialists are for, and CCIMs are specialists in triple net commercial property. You can visit the CCIM website. Just go to www.ccim.com. Using 1031 Exchange Super Tips PowerPoint on our website with your clients. Okay, the PowerPoint accomplishes three things. One, it differentiates you from your competition. Two, it puts educational tools, good educational tools, in the hands of your prospects. And three, it gives you the opportunity to profile all your clients' real estate holdings rather than just making a quick sale. Remember, superstars are always looking for multiple sale opportunities. 1031 Wealth Machine. Okay, so taxes, leverage, and compounding, TLC. That's all you got to remember, that little acronym. The power of the exchange to defer taxes. So you sell multiple investment properties throughout your lifetime. You defer, you defer, you defer, and then you die. That's the battle cry. And why is that important? Simple. Because when you die, you get a step up in cost basis to the value of the holdings as of the date of death or 6 months following the date of death. That means that you can not only make exchanges deferred taxes, you can actually, based upon your death, they become tax-free to your heirs. The power of leverage. The leverage of the dollar saved in a 1031 is powerful because anybody knows $100,000 paid out in taxes never comes back. $100,000 in your pocket, compounding over a long period of time, can become a very big number. Increase your cash flow. This gives you the opportunity to convert non-income producing property for clients like raw land into income producing property. And it also gives your clients the possibilities to sell older properties, buy better property, get rid of management expenses, tenants, toilets, trash, all that good stuff. Taxes. Deferring capital gains taxes on income and investment property allows for a step up in cost basis at death for your heirs. So that eliminates taxes owed, making all that deferral into a tax-free transfer. Now that would be estate taxes notwithstanding. However, estate taxes are a separate issue caused by the overall size of your estate. And there are several ways to avoid these by planning using trusts, high exemptions, and other sophisticated estate planning tools. Taxes on the sale of real estate also can increase your adjusted gross income. And what happens at that point, if your taxable income goes high enough, is you can lose your itemized deductions, medical deductions, IRA deductions, child care deductions, all if your adjusted gross is too high. And 1031 can help solve these problems. Large increases in your adjusted gross income can also trigger the exchanger gets pushed into the AMT, or alternative minimum tax bracket, which is significantly higher than the capital gains tax rate and much higher than ordinary income tax rates. The power of leverage and compounding. $100,000 tax savings on an $800,000 property sale means you can buy another $500,000 in real estate at a 20% loan to value ratio. So that tax savings can be leveraged into further holdings of property that have the potential for appreciating and producing greater income as time goes forward. With 1031, let's say you sell a $800,000 property and pay no taxes, assuming $300,000 was on a note. Okay, you buy a new property, increase the note to $700,000, and your equity remaining is $500,000. 800 minus the 300 debt, you have cash equity to bring into the deal once you paid down the previous note, assuming you paid it down. So on a $1.3 million property, 6% compounding turns that into $4.16 million over a 20-year period. Without a 1031, you sell the property and pay the $100,000 in gains tax, state income taxes, leaving $700,000. Of course, you still have the same $300,000, so you take out $300,000 in debt again to buy replacement property, add your initial equity, which is now down to $400,000 because you had to pay $100,000 out in taxes, and you have a $700,000 purchase. But at 6% compounding, this turns into $2.24 million. So What you have here is not doing an exchange costs you almost 1.9 million of wealth building potential over a 20-year period. And as the bright little man in the lower left-hand corner, Albert Einstein once said, compounding is the 8th wonder of the world. Increase your cash flow. Raw land does not cash flow. It can't be depreciated. Thus, there are no income or tax benefits. The only benefit is appreciation. Show your clients how to convert raw land via a 1031 exchange into triple net lease or multifamily rental units. They'll gain from positive cash flow, the depreciation allowance, and it will help reduce their taxable income. And then they have the appreciation potential. So you've solved the problem. Shed management and headaches. Investors with older rental properties that will have large future maintenance expenses can use a 1031 to buy newer property that will require less maintenance. Older properties with reduced debt levels normally have high cash flows. As their depreciation allowance grows smaller, they can begin to produce what's called phantom income, which is taxable income. Hiring a property manager also can alleviate a lot of tenants and toilets headaches for investors while still maintaining positive cash flow. And of course, triple net lease commercial property is the undisputed king of solving client management headaches. And once again, you can talk to CCIMs about that, and they'll tell you what's out there for triple net lease properties. Okay, 1031 exchange client super tips. These are tips that are meant to bring home the gold. So, using the lease option to avoid dealer status that forces full-time developers to pay ordinary income tax on gains. I call this the part-time developer strategy. Strategy 2, buying a vacation home in paradise tax-free using a 1031 or a 1034 exchange or a combination of both. I call this the paradise strategy. Take cash out tax-free from your 1031 exchange. Now I know you've been told that any cash coming out of an exchange is taxable, but there are ways to take cash tax-free out before or after the exchange. Building your dream home using 1031 exchange and a 1034 rollover. I call that the dream home strategy. Buying your kids a home tax-free, renting it to them at 20% below market, and converting it later to a personal residence. I call that the sweetheart strategy. How to save big bucks by turning a build-to-suit exchange into a delayed exchange. I call this the home builder strategy. And number 7, the conservation buyer strategy. 1031 plus conservation easement. I call that the ranch buyer strategy. Now, every one of these tips are pure gold for realtors. The tax-free cash out from the exchange strategy. Okay, you refinance the relinquished property before the exchange. Take out cash and then roll all the remaining net selling price into replacement property. You pay no tax, and the cash you do take out prior because of the refi is tax-free. Refinance the replacement property after the exchange is completed. Take out cash without having to pay taxes. It's the other way to do it. Now, warning, taking cash out during the exchange creates a taxable event. And these are all legal techniques that still give you protection for exchange under the IRS safe harbor rules. Buying a vacation home in paradise tax-free. Use a 1031 to roll over to buy a unique vacation property or dream home. You can attempt to rent the property by placing it with a property manager. Use it no more than 2 weeks per year for the first year or two. You can add on additional time for marketing and maintenance visits, bringing the total up to 3-4 weeks a year. A letter from your realtor can help document those visits, but be careful, the IRS audits utility records and making sure this is not abused. Okay, you file 2 Schedule E and 2 4562 attachments on the property. These are both tax forms that go in with your tax return. And then you convert the property in the second year to a personal residence tax-free because you met the 2-year holding period. You can then bring in the equity from your primary residence using a primary residence exemption or 1034 rollover, bringing the dream home debt to 0. Then convert the dream home in paradise into your primary residence. Using the lease option strategy to avoid dealer status. Now, builders can do this, but there was a Supreme Court case back in 1966 called William Mallet versus Riddle. And here the Supreme Court said that to be a dealer, your first purpose, your chief principal, primary, and only purpose must be to sell. The lease option. By properly structuring the lease option to avoid dealer status, that's the single best way to avoid dealer status in a selling situation. And avoiding dealer status allows the seller to do a 1031 exchange. Now, the option agreement should make reference to the lease, but the lease should not make reference to the option agreement. And the lease should be for at least 2 years, because that 2 years will give you the holding requirement necessary in order to convert it to personal use. Now, the conclusion is that lease options can help developers who do not develop as a primary form of business sell developed property and avoid dealer status. This would be somebody who's maybe doing a one-off, but I know everybody out there knows somebody who does that kind of thing. And the downside is the 1 to 2 year holding requirement under the lease arrangement. So you got to hold it for a little bit, but beyond that, it's another way to avoid a whole lot of taxation. Strategy for aging parents. So buy a second home with a 1031 rollover near your children or grandchildren. You rent it to one of your children for up to 20% below market rents. And of course, the IRS says that's completely legal. Grandma and grandpa can even gift up to $14,000 per year per child, grandchild, and they can even gift to their grandkids if they want to. So it could be a pretty significant amount of money to help pay rent, mortgage, whatever the case may be on the home. Grandma and grandpa now can visit or live in the property. They can come as many days a year as they want, because nobody's keeping score. It's not, I mean, the property is being rented, and it's being rented within the guise of what's legal. You convert the property after 2 years of renting it to the kids into a personal residence tax-free, and that gave the kids 2 years of being able to save up a down payment for a home of their own. In the meantime, grandma and grandpa decide to make that property a personal residence. They could sell their previous primary residence and use a 1034 exclusion to reduce the debt on the new residence to zero. Okay, combining 1031 exchange with a 1034 rollover to construct a move-up home. Client owns existing home with 100% equity. In other words, mortgage is paid off. Rental property has 50% equity. So in the first year, they sell a rental property and use a 1031 exchange to acquire raw land for a dream home. In year 2, they do base improvements: road, electric, gas, sanitary. In the third year, on the second anniversary of the rental property sale, they begin construction of the dream home, and they convert the land to personal use using tax-free. It's no problem, because they've met the 2 year holding requirement. And they list the primary residence using a 1034 exemption to pay off the construction loan for the new primary residence. Next strategy is builder's delay. So expensive build-to-suit exchanges, and they are expensive, becomes a delayed exchange and saves the builder a whole bunch of money. So here's how you do it. The builder is attempting to complete an IRC 1031 exchange, having sold a rental property. He's now trying to construct a new rental home on raw land within the 180-day total exchange period. The builder has nightmares over doing another build-to-suit exchange, because the exchange intermediary was slow in dispersing funds to satisfy the builder's vendors. Plus, the exchange cost the builder $6,000, because build-to-suit exchanges. Step 2 is the builder refinances the property they are selling prior to its sale and takes out the necessary equity to complete the improvements on the property they are building, tax-free. The builder then controls all the money necessary to complete the improvements instead of the qualified intermediary, so there are no vendor issues. The builder then completes the new structure within the 180-day total exchange period. Builder saves over $5,000 in exchange fees, because it's now just a standard delayed exchange. It only cost about $750. As the realtor, you suggested the strategy, so the builder sells the relinquished property through you and will use you on all future listings, because you added tremendous value. Conservation buyer strategy. As land costs create a lack of economy for traditional farm and ranch uses, especially here in mountain country, large ranch buyers have become the economic elite, often with substantially different objectives from mainstream ranch establishment. This buyer is often interested in the conservation, fish and game preserve management or enhancement, and just the pure solitude with no intention of ever developing. So combining 1031 exchanges with the tax benefits of conservation easements, can allow this a buyer to acquire a large ranch for a fraction of the cost of the listing price out of pocket. Tenant in common investments. We'll talk about these briefly. I've had some experience with them, and there's ups, downs, and everything in between. But tenant in commons were created by the 2002 Revenue Procedure 2002-22. They allow a group of real estate investors up to 35 in number to own a divided interest in real property, and it's a divided and deeded interest. TIC pools also allow investors with a relatively small amount of capital to invest, say $100,000 or more, to own an interest in grade A commercial property with large national tenants on long-term triple net leases, something they probably couldn't do if they just put the $100,000 into the market. TIC pools can also own shopping centers, big box stores, standalone businesses, multifamily rental properties, strip malls, all kinds of income producing property, storage units, you name it. So tenant in common interests are capable of being 1031 exchanged because the client has an actual deeded interest. Tenant in common investments do need a great deal of project sourcing capability and a lot of due diligence. They need to create their own tenant in common investments and be able to assess, the TIC investment markets, access them all over the country. Perform the due diligence, market analysis, credit analysis, property specific analysis, and negotiate the lease contract terms for the clients as a TIC's representative, but they do that for a fee. What you want to watch out for in understanding the property investment process here is higher returns mean higher risk. Diversification by type of property owned and region of the country that it's owned is important. National tenants with strong credit history, great location, and a long-term lease make the best tenants. And of course, don't get tempted into stretching for yield or concentrating too many assets in any one property type or region because these are avoidable mistakes. So what do good tenant in common investments do for you as a buyer's representative? They pull Dun & Bradstreet, Standard & Poor's data, credit analysis, and reports on all potential tenants. They research the location, visit the site, obtain local demographics, traffic data, perform competitive analysis, environmental assessment, financial analysis, lease terms, hire property managers, trustees, all that kind of stuff. So it puts it on a very professional level. What types of property can you invest in? Shopping centers, apartment complexes, big box stores, strip malls, industrial, fast food, office buildings, retail stores, storage facilities, pretty much anything. The sky's the limit. So determining your client's investment objectives, current financial situation, assets and liabilities, settlements, judgments, beneficiaries, etc. Current financial assets, current real estate assets, understanding the monthly income that they need, time requirements to create that income, and the ability to take risk versus the return required. Where to invest, what markets are the best, property types, what are the risks. You can invest anywhere, as long as it's inside of the 50 states. So how to assess credit risk, typically Dun & Bradstreet for individuals, closely held corporate entities or non-publicly traded companies. And then Standard & Poor's is used for publicly. How to further assess risks through market analysis, traffic counts, competitive threats, community demographics, forecasted growth, site and location visits, talking with local area, CCIMs, environmental assessment, main tools. Now the use of leverage, and this happens a lot with tenant in common investments. Leverage equals debt equals mortgage, right? Does the internal rate of return or capitalization rate exceed the interest rate on the loan? It's an important element because knowing that, what the loan terms are, what if we're forced to refinance the loan at a period when the loan interest rates will exceed the capitalization rate? That means you're upside down, underwater. What's the property's appreciation potential and not just its current rate of return from the flow of income payments? Does the use of leverage make sense? How old, how well capitalized, and how risk averse is the investor? Yeah. Debt versus equity. This is a buyer's big decision. Debt financing is near historical lows, thus the banks do not want to commit to low rates on long-term fixed rates for anything besides a single-family home. Debt usually is secured by a first mortgage position. Equity financing gets expensive. That usually isn't a very big percentage of overall financing in any project, but at the end of the day, the equity return expectation is high, it can be 20 to 50%. And equity is unsecured because it's in a second position behind the bank and the debt financing. This brings into play what is the average weighted cost of capital between the equity and the debt, and then understanding how a deal's financing is structured is paramount to risk analysis. So tenant and common investments, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good is they allow regional diversification, property type diversification. They perform really good quality due diligence in most cases, and they have access to some of the nation's leading commercial realtors. The bad is the fees tend to be high, which negatively impacts returns, and right now cap rates are low. That's just the time in the economy that we're at. But and they're also encumbered by NASD requirements. In other words, they're looked over. The ugly is they use leverage and tend to obtain financing that makes current returns look good, but can leave investors holding future interest rate risk. So, smaller scale regional TIC ownership groups, nothing in the law prevents one or more interested property investors from getting together to own commercial real estate in a tenant and common ownership form. These groups are best to stick with small numbers, 2 to 5 people, so the IRS is not tempted to rule that the group is a partnership. The group can create its own TIC agreement through an attorney, hire its own property managers, perform its own due diligence, and determine its own loan-to-value ratio, thereby eliminating a lot of fees, overhead, and interest rate risks that plague broker-dealer form TIC investor pools. So there is a secondary option, assuming people are willing to do the legwork. Okay, so back on to exchange topics, 12 exchange rules and topics. These are things you really need to know about exchanges. You must use a qualified intermediary. You must use a qualified escrow. You have to meet the like-kind requirement. The language needed in the buy-sell agreement is important. Proper documentation, the holding requirement, ownership and registration rules, 1031 time requirements, property identification rules, what constitutes boot in an exchange, the total exchange period, and how to select a qualified intermediary. So, you must use a qualified intermediary. What does qualified mean? You must use an independent, unrelated party in all delayed and simultaneous exchanges. I've cited the IRS regulations there. The qualified intermediary is a middleman, a safe harbor in the IRS regulations. The types of qualified intermediaries, they're a limited service that just do documents and act as escrow, but they won't advise on technical aspects of exchange. Now, 1031 Property Exchange, our company, is a full service intermediary. We do exchanges full-time, act as escrow, complete all the necessary documents, and advise your client on the technical aspects of the exchange. Who can't be a qualified intermediary? The exchanger's accountant, attorney, financial advisor, realtor, or any relative. That would be considered a related party. So, you must use a qualified escrow account as well. With the exception of simultaneous exchanges, all other exchanges require a qualified escrow account, and that's a safe harbor under the IRS regulations. The exchanger must not have the ability to receive any exchange dollars during the exchange, or else they've created what's called constructive receipt of proceeds, or constructive receipt. The escrow cannot be pledged as security or collateral during the exchange. And the exchange company should have clear written policies that require the exchanger's approval, and I would say written approval, of all escrow disbursements. That's just a safety mechanism. The qualified intermediary and the qualified escrow operate as separate IRS safe harbors. So the qualified intermediary completes the documents that keep the transaction in compliance with IRC 1031, and the qualified escrow holds the funds during the exchange period and complies with the IRC escrow requirement, no constructive receipt, things of that nature. Now, the intermediary can and often will perform both functions, and 1031 property exchange, we act as both the intermediary, but we also set up the qualified escrow through our bank, B of I, which is a federal bank, and you'll find out why that's important later. Like-kind property requirement, very broad. It's virtually means any real property for any other type of real property. I mean, all the properties you see there below are considered like-kind property. You could sell an office building, buy a ranch. You can sell an apartment, buy a townhouse. You can sell a condominium, buy raw land. Doesn't really matter. There's even more to like-kind property. A ground lease is considered like-kind property under 1031 section A1-1.c. A ground lease of 30 years or more, or a lease of 30 years or more, excuse me. So people that own Forest Service cabins, for instance. A partial tenant in common interest in real property. Easements are also considered exchangeable. Mineral and water rights, oil and gas leases, gold, silver, you name it. Improvements to be constructed can also be considered part of an exchange. And then even certain timeshares fall under IRC 1031. So what is not like-kind real estate? Well, inventory or property held primarily for sale. In other words, there's an intent for immediate resale. Corporate stock, bonds, securities, REITs, real estate investment trusts, mortgages or notes. A partnership interest. Certificates of trust or beneficial interest. Real property to personal property. In other words, you can't do a 1031 exchange and sell a piece of real property or real estate and then put it into a car. It's not going to work. Exchanges between certain related parties, and that's under IRC 267B, where one of the exchange properties is subsequently transferred before the end of 2 years. Once again, 2-year holding requirement. Certain intangible assets like going concern value and goodwill, say in a business that's selling, they don't qualify for 1031 exchange. Real property in the U.S. for real property outside the U.S. You can't sell property in the U.S. and do an exchange to foreign property. Special rules for partnerships. Okay, a partnership does not qualify for an IRC 1031 exchange. However, an entity, the partnership itself, can qualify for an exchange provided all requirements are met, and that would include the same partnership entity, meaning the same partners, continue to hold the replacement property as like-kind investment property. If that's the case, then a partnership can do an exchange, but you've got to get everybody to agree to come along and play ball. Language you must have in a buy-sell, and I think everybody's seen this before, but basically seller herein acknowledges that it's the intention of the buyer to complete an IRC 1031. And we have this exchange language posted on our site, so I won't bore you by reading it. Language you should avoid in a buy-sell. To avoid taxability of personal property. Do not list any significant personal property in the buy-sell or settlement sheets. You could do a parallel rollover of real property for real property and personal property for personal property to create a non-taxable event, or acquire the personal property separate from the real property exchange with funds outside the exchange and outside of closing. That's going to make it a non-taxable event. These are true stories, okay? Realtors listing garbage disposals, washers, dryers, stoves, and yes, even the kitchen sink when they know they are doing a 1031 exchange. It makes things messy, especially when many of the items that get listed are fixtures to begin with and must be assigned some market value. So just don't list any of those types of items in your buy-sell agreements. Proper exchange documentation. 1031 exchange agreement you must have. I won't go through and read the whole thing, but that helps you comply with the safe harbors. 1031 exchange escrow agreement, the 1031 exchange addendum and assignment, the 45-day identification letter, and the 1031 exchange settlement sheet. You also need to have an affidavit of disclosure of non-foreign status on all exchanges, as well as a 1031 exchange settlement sheet for replacement property. And then now, with the Patriot Act, it requires a copy of the exchanger's driver's license to be submitted with every exchange. Proper escrow procedures. Only use an intermediary as an escrow agent if they meet the following 3 requirements. And this is for the safety of your client's money. They use a federally insured bank. They have procedures that require written escrow authorization forms signed by the client, and that their escrow bank requires this form in writing prior to releasing any funds. And 3, they perform all funds transfers by direct wire or deposit to and from closing title companies. If those 3 things are in place, you're never going to have any fidelity problems with an exchange whatsoever. And we make sure we use all 3 of those rules. Holding requirement. So the relinquished and replacement properties must be held for investment or business use. You must use the property for business, as rental property, or as an investment like land. You must not use the properties for personal use, with the exception of the 14 days and then the marketing and maintenance visits. There's a 10% exception under the vacation home provisions. You must not hold property as inventory for immediate sale. Once again, back to holding period. And you should not hold properties primarily for sale with a pre-intent to sell. And according to the IRS, you must hold the replacement property for a period of at least 1 to 2 years, but 2 is better to prove intent, and quite frankly, unless it's been a 2-year holding period, we just don't like doing an exchange because there's the possibility of an audit. And then 7, according to the IRS, there should be a consistency of ownership from relinquished property or replacement property without any changes for a 1 to 2 year period. The holding requirement further, according to the IRS, that consistency without any changes for a 1 to 2 year period, as we just discussed. This means don't change ownership composition at all in any way in which the property is held for the first 2 years. This means going out and placing the property in a trust or buying the interests of another tenant in common or any other conceivable form of registration change. About the only thing that will pass muster would be the potential of one of the owners having either a death or a divorce, and that's probably a fairly explainable circumstance. 1031 time requirements, you've got a 45-day identification period, and there are no exceptions, including weekends and holidays. If your 45th day is on a weekend or a holiday, doesn't matter. You've got to have the identification complete for your replacement properties. And then the 180-day total exchange period, that's the total time from the beginning date of the sale of the first property or your relinquished property. The IRS doesn't have exceptions for that in the safe harbor, but they do occur occasionally. And both time requirements have to be met to have a qualifying 1031 exchange, and they run concurrently from the date of the sale of the first property. Go outside the safe harbor? Well, 45-day identification? No. There's absolutely no exception to the identification and designation rule. The 180-day rule, yeah, with some reverse exchanges, you do see them go outside the 180 days, and but if the IRS does an audit on the exchange, or even if they come along and take a peek at the exchange, they may allow it to stand, but they may not. And that's the risk of going outside the safe harbor rules. Property identification rules further, there are 3 rules. The 3 property rule, which is used by about 90% of all exchanges. Within the confines of 45 days, it allows you to identify any 3 properties regardless of their value. You must acquire at least one of these 3 properties as your replacement. Second rule, the 200% of value rule, you can identify more than 3 properties within 45 days, but their combined value must not exceed 200% of the selling price of the relinquished property. And then 3, the 95% rule, you can identify any number of replacement properties if the fair market value of the properties actually received by the end of the exchange period is at least 95% of the aggregate fair market value of all potential replacement properties identified. So for the most part, you're going to see pretty much everybody migrate toward that 3 property rule. What constitutes boot in an exchange? Well, boot is any taxable income created in a 1031 exchange, and boot can be created in several ways. Not reinvesting all the sale proceeds of your relinquished property, taking cash out during the exchange period, personal property that gets listed on a buy-sell agreement creates boot, and then if you reduce any of the mortgage value on your relinquished property going into the replacement property. So for instance, if you had $100,000 in mortgage on the property, the relinquished property, the first sale, You got to have at least 100,000 in debt on the replacement property, or else the reduction in debt is considered cash boot. Exchange period. 180 days, no ifs, ands, or buts to complete if you're going to stay inside the IRS safe harbor. So otherwise, you're in an unsafe harbor, and the IRS might start shooting at you, which means audit. The first 45 days of the exchange period are the identification period. These two periods, like I said before, run concurrently. How to select a qualified intermediary? Well, experience in complex tax and estate planning is a helpful tool, and of course we've got plenty of that here at 1031 Property Exchange. Has the technology to electronically deliver the documents. I think that's important. Things need to move places quickly, and you know, scanned and emailed documents work as well as anything else. Has a website that you can use as an educational resource tool, and we strive to keep the best education tools possible available on our website for your clients. Gives exchange advice plus prepares the documents, and then has the procedures in place that stipulate in writing that the exchanger must approve all disbursements, and then only performs exchanges. You know, doesn't also attempt practicing law or tax preparation, but it's a true specialist. And I think that's one of the strong suits for our company, is that we don't have a side business like, you know, an accounting practice or a law practice. We just do exchanges. To add value to your client relationships as a realtor, hey, help your clients obtain financing at favorable terms through your banking relationships. You know bankers, you know, help them through that process. Solve your clients' problems. I mean, your clients have a lot of taxes, payment connect partners, tenants, toilets, and trash, not enough cash flow, too much management, a need for some cash, desire for better property. All the problems can be solved with 1031 exchange. Use a qualified intermediary early in the process with your client to develop tactics and optimization strategies to save your clients thousands of extra dollars. That's where the value comes in. How to use our website as a resource tool for more sales? Well, just go to 1031 Property Exchange, and your clients can go to the site, print the exchange diagrams, basic exchange information, library links. You'll appreciate the fact that these diagrams are easy to understand, and all the language is plain English. It's not legalese, and it makes the concepts much easier to grasp. One hot tip, go to our resource tools. Here we have virtually every exchange and tax form, both federal and state, and there are very state-specific exchange rules. Idaho is a good example. You have to hold the proceeds in an Idaho bank for an exchange. So there are different rules for different states. Send us your property listings too. You can do that. So send us your property listings. We'll feature them on our website. If they're income properties, just send the MLS number, a photo, and the description of the property, and we'll put it up on our website, and your property will be exposed to all the exchangers we have. Why you should give us your 1031 exchange business? Well, we use the safest procedures, making sure that clients sign for all disbursements and that funds are wired directly from closing to escrow. We deliver all documents electronically and offer the best training, education, and resource tools for your clients. And we can deliver duplicates to you, attorneys, or CPAs. We're experienced and have performed hundreds of exchanges in the past. We maintain offices that are convenient to major title companies, CPAs, attorneys, and next door to our bank, which helps expedite transfers. And we are one of the only exchange intermediaries that allows realtors to list their property on our website. We have 24 years of estate planning experience and have helped clients perform hundreds of 1035 exchanges, 1031 exchanges, conservation easements, and combining these strategies can allow many clients to purchase better property with no money out of pocket. What other services can we perform? Well, we can independently assist clients looking for triple net property through our local and national network of commercial realtors. Perform due diligence services. We perform due diligence for $100 million plus projects. Introduce clients to attorneys that can form a tenant in common agreement. Our decades of estate planning experience has helped us develop relationships with some of the state's best attorneys. We can even introduce clients to banks. If you don't want to do it, we'd be happy to do that. Ones that have favorable lending terms for tenant common groups, or we can help clients negotiate favorable terms on big deals because of our banking experience. And we can introduce clients to trustees and institutional property managers that can handle triple net lease commercial property. So anyway, give us a call for a free consultation. My name is Russ Squire, and thanks for listening to this whole presentation. I hope you got some good information out of it and that it will help you increase your real estate sales.